Yes, can I confirm? I understood that the question is that Europe increase its exports on high technology products if it's going to affect Mercosur employment, is it?
Mercosur employment in South America, yes.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's well. When I thought about asymmetry, in fact, the prospects of the agreement is that the trade gains are going to be bigger for Europe, with impacts on production and obviously on also employment in our countries. In the case of high technology goods, high technology sectors, Europe is much more competitive, and it's going probably to have a negative impact on our already not very competitive production, with impact on jobs and high quality jobs. They are not very numerous. I mean, usually this kind of employment, or this kind of products are not very intensive in labor, but they are high quality jobs. And the second point is that direct jobs may be not a very large number, but they are very good in very high quality jobs. And you have all the chain with the indirect jobs that can be negatively affected. Moreover, the other problem, and this was a little bit what I was talking about, you have dynamics effects of destroying or threatening sectors that are more technological developed, in particular for developing countries or medium income countries as ours.
Thank you, Mrs. Kassier. Er was nog een vraag, volgens mij. Of u wilt er iets over zeggen? Gaat u gang.
Ja, ik wil graag nog een aanvulling geven. Want dit gaf mij toch even de gelegenheid om er even wat langer over na te denken. En ik denk eigenlijk ook dat, naar aanleiding van wat mevrouw Kassier zegt, van dat het wat nuancering behoeft, dat negatieve beeld. En laat ik wat dichter bij huis blijven. Wij als Wageningen Universiteit hebben heel veel internationale studenten, waar die kennis en expertise meenemen, ook vaak weer terug naar huis. Dat is ook export van kennis. Nou, dat interpreteer ik dan als een hoogwaardig product. Wat over het algemeen ook goed bekend staat als dat zeg maar terug in eigen land heel veel positieve spin-off heeft. En dus bijdraagt aan de economische ontwikkeling van een land, van de landbouwsector, meer specifiek. En als je het dan over hoogwaardige producten hebt in de landbouwsector, dan denk ik bijvoorbeeld ook even aan veevoer. Dat is ook met name een specifiek product wat ook geëxporteerd wordt richting Latijns-Amerika. Maar natuurlijk nog veel meer andere landen, waar ook veel kennis en expertise in zit. Waar het ook, dus dat rangschik ik dan ook onder hoogwaardige producten, wat ook gewoon bewezen bijdraagt aan de productiviteitsontwikkelingen van een sector elders. Nou, dat even als, zeg maar, als nuancering van een algemeen beeld wat kan oprijzen van als wij hoogwaardige producten of technologie vanuit hier exporteren, dat per definitie negatief is aan een zeg maar importerende kant. Dat wil ik even meegeven.
Helder. Mevrouw Piet.
Good. Thank you for the questions. I'll start by responding on the question about the deforestation law that is proposed. Certainly, with regard to soya imports, it would make it harder. It would lead eventually to decreased soy imports. My main concern is I think that we are not prepared for it as the Netherlands. We are, as I said, the largest importer of soy in Europe, and actually we don't have good plans, nor technologies, nor crops ready to produce the protein that we would need to produce. So actually, when that law would come, I think there would be quite a serious issue for the Netherlands as a consequence. And I think seeing that law on the horizon, we should be triggered to action now to work on some of those alternative proteins, on improving the legume crops, on searching through side streams, and on microbial protein production that we're not yet doing in a significant way. Of course, all of these were named in the National Protein Strategy. There is also a Bean Deal, the Green Deal, vlinderbloemigen, legume crops that was signed in the Netherlands. Both of those are great initiatives and point in the very correct direction. Neither one of them have any budget behind them. So this is a concept, it's a theory, it's an idea for the Netherlands, but it's actually not something that's happening in any serious way in practice, and that worries me. Your question also about would we need more to turn back deforestation? In the global context, certainly. The increasing demand for land resources comes from the increasing demand for meat consumption because we are growing the amount of land because we're cultivating crops directly for feed rather than for food. We're not consuming this soy directly, right? We're feeding it to animals. So the increasing meat consumption is actually what's driving the increasing need for land for food production. If we look at where the actual increase in meat consumption is coming from, that's coming from the growing middle class in emerging markets. It's not coming from the European consumer. We're holding steady, basically, in Europe on meat consumption. That means that if we want to sort of turn back deforestation globally, we have to look at how do we turn around our demand for meat consumption. Well, two options. Number one, preferentially work on diet. Let's change our diet as Europeans shift back to something a bit more balanced, 50-50, 40-60. The second option that we have, because as I said, the demand is on crops that are cultivated for feed purposes. The so-called circularity narrative says we will only keep the number of animals that we can feed on basically waste, on residual streams, et cetera. We're never going to directly cultivate crops to feed to animals. So that's eliminating what we call food-feed competition. We shouldn't be growing soy and feeding that to cows because we can eat soy. We should only be feeding cows on grass. We should only be feeding them on leafy residues. We should only be feeding them on, I don't know, spent brewer's grain, all of these residual streams that we can put in to feed. That's actually, in my opinion, the most ethical food system. And according to calculations from my colleague Hanne van Zanten, if we were to go over to a fully circular system, that would mean we could get about 1/3 of our proteins from animal source foods, and we could reduce our land use globally significantly. Shall I go ahead and answer yes, okay. To the last question about whether Europe can be protein self-sufficient, absolutely. The Netherlands can also be protein self-sufficient. The question is, are we self-sufficient with the current system that we have, or are we self-sufficient and include also making a dietary shift? Making a dietary shift makes it significantly easier to be self-sufficient without major changes in the level of agricultural land that we have. Although, as I said, I think we're not quite ready because our investments in protein crops have been lagging behind for the last 30 years. So we immediately, urgently need significant breeding programs to increase the protein yields of the crops that we have available to us today. There's nothing that we can grow in Europe that competes in terms of protein yield with a soybean grown in South America right now. And that's not because it's impossible, that's because we haven't put concerted effort into doing so.
Dank u wel, mevrouw Piet. Dat was de eerste ronde. Ik weet niet of er behoefte is aan een vervolgvraag. Dan geef ik graag het woord aan de heer Klink.
Dank u wel. I have a question for Ms. Piet. I do understand your perspective. But my question is, globally, the trend is we're all consuming more animal protein than consuming plant protein. So what can we do about it? Because if as the Netherlands and perhaps as Western Europe, we can make a change in the diet. But yeah, it's quite complex and also cultural related. And in the past, it was like a higher income leads to another diet and consuming more animal protein. What's your opinion to change that and to make a trend shift in the trend?
Dank voor de vraag. De heer Amhaus.
I have a question for Mrs. Castillo. What do you think if we say in Europe we will not implement the trade agreement and we will continue on WTO trade and say to the Mercosur, please first do your homework, improve your animal welfare and your labor conditions and your environment conditions till you are to the level of Europe. And then we will continue to speak and to sit down to the table. Is that the direction we should go? Or do you have an alternative?
Thank you, Mr. Amhaus. Mrs. Teunissen?
Yes, my question is also to Mrs. Castillo. I hope I pronounced it correctly. The Brazilian economy, we hear a lot in the Netherlands. Well, we should make trade agreements to also improve the Brazilian economy. But I'm curious about your perspective on this. If you look at the Brazilian economy at this moment, with all its challenges, also deforestation, so the ecological effects, the animal welfare challenges and the human rights challenges, what do you think is a good way to organize international trade, which is also profitable for a Brazilian economy?
Dank, mevrouw Teunissen. Nou, dat zijn weer mooie gebalanceerde set vragen. Is er eentje voor de heer Van Berkem, alleen voor mevrouw Piet en Castillo, hè? Ja. Dus dan Mrs. Piet.
Thank you for the question. I first of all want to start by challenging a little bit the norm on how much meat consumption is standard. Just by saying, if we look at the figures for meat consumption in the Netherlands in the last decades, we've seen it growing significantly. Right back in the 60s, we weren't consuming the level of meat that we're consuming today. So it's not that is a sort of standard that we should all expect. It's where we are right now. It's a sort of a time point, and I don't think that it's not reflecting the nutritional guidelines, and it's also not doing us very much good in terms of public health and well-being where we are right now. Another part of your question was, I interpret it as something like, does a dietary shift in the Netherlands matter in the global context? We're a small country, right? The world is eating so much meat. How much impact are we truly going to have? And on one hand, I understand that position. On the other hand, if everyone says that, then nothing changes. That's one thing. And number two, we are in the list of, I don't know if those are best performers or worst performers in terms of proportion of animal protein consumption. Much of Western Europe is among the highest consuming. It is not that everyone in the world is over-consuming or consuming more animal source foods than plant source foods at the moment. That's not the case. But certainly in almost all of Western Europe, we are doing so. My personal position would be that then if you are among those who are most extreme performing, that you are among those first who have an obligation to implement a change. And then I understood your question about, okay, but how to make that change, right? Because obviously the Netherlands is a country and will stay and should stay a country where there's free choice. You choose your food, food autonomy, as we call it. It's a deeply held belief and a very important one that we have individual autonomous choice over our food. And that is true. And at the same time, you can only choose the food that is put in front of you or that is offered to you or that is available in retail. That's why our position is to encourage working on what we call the food choice environment, which means the landscape of foods that you are exposed to. And there are still plenty of places in the Netherlands where if you want to choose a sustainable and healthy option that's not easily accessible to you, for example, at a station, at a train station. And our position is that we can work on that food choice landscape. We can work on what's presented to people. Work from my colleague Emily de Vet has shown, for example, that access to sustainable and healthy nutrition is correlated with income. So if you find yourself in a lower socioeconomic status location in the Netherlands, you are less likely to have access to sustainable and healthy nutrition. And I think that's something we should work on. And certainly working on those kind of interventions will help us make a dietary shift.
And I was also asking about the trend globally of
Yes.
the whole world, that people are with higher incomes, people are consuming more animal protein and consuming more meat. That's a trend, or isn't it?
Yes, no, you're absolutely correct. There is a linear correlation between animal source food consumption and GDP. And how do we turn that around? That's a nice question. I don't have an easy answer for that, but I definitely do think, as I said, that as Western Europe, in being among the countries who are most high in animal source food consumption, I certainly think that making a change here is an example that we can set. And I would not feel comfortable advocating for any solution that says, do as I say, don't do as I do, right? Rather change yourselves first before addressing increasing meat consumption in other parts of the world where the level, the starting level of animal source food consumption is lower. Did I answer, was it, yes? Okay.
Ms. Castillo, I believe that Ms. Teunissen had a question to you. I'm not sure whether you understood and heard the question, because I would like to give you the floor, Ms. Castillo.
Yes, I've understood, and I think the two questions are quite related. I will try to answer together, and to say that, what could I do for the first question to... Well, I would like to say that we would like, the ideal world was with multilateral institutions that functioned well, and that we could have a more equilibrated power negotiations in multilateral organizations. And this is not the real world, mainly since 95, beginning of 20s, and since then Europe, EU and Mercosur have been negotiating. Why they have been negotiating? Because both blocs have interests on it. Europe have interest to keep some traditional partners in the Americas, is a kind of a cultural but also geopolitical purposes, I think, and also because trade in economic terms, talking about trade, but also FDI and European companies, they have, we are not a Chinese market, but not very small neither. Then I think Europe have interests on that. From our point of view, Mercosur have a very strong links with Europe because of colonization and the presence that is linked to that of European companies and a lot of other links, then I think we have interest. So what I was saying, and I recognize that we have a lot of problems, obviously, is that this agreement was initially a cooperation, an association agreement with a strong arm, a strong part in cooperation. Then I would like to, I think part of South American citizens would like to see an agreement that would not compromise some long-term goals, economic goals. As I said, in this version of the version that was signed in 19 of this agreement was a rupture related to the versions that were being negotiated for 20 years, and it was signed very quickly because of both sides' political reasons. And then what I would like to answer is to say that I think that a better version of the agreement can be done. That would encourage a good practice in Latin America. For example, as I said, encouraging or not disencouraging manufacture and manufacture activities in Latin America could have environmental effects, positive environmental effects, because less incentive to this agrobusiness activities that we know that have impacts on deforestations and everything. Then I would say that we could not, you asked if we should wait for Brazil and other Mercosur countries to make our homework and then start to negotiate. Unhappily, if you wait for this, we are going to wait for a long time, and we will not be able to sign agreements with a lot of countries. Then even China, other. And I don't think that trade is about that. Trade can have, we can make the most of trade, trying to design rules and to cope with cooperation tools that can contribute to both sides' development. For example, this kind of exchanging, trying to show. To communicate about the changing of the way of people eating. It can be a kind of cooperation that can be very fruitful, coming from Europe, exchange experiences and trying to diffuse this kind of mentality. And this was the question. Sorry, I'm not sure that I asked the second question.
Dat was geantwoord. That was your question.
The first question.
That second question was Mrs. Teunissen' question, and I do believe that your introduction also related to the question of Mr. Amhaus. So they are nodding and seems to be satisfied. Ms. Piet would like to maybe reflect a bit on those answers and responses as well. So, Ms. Castillo, thank you so much. And then Ms. Piet, allowing you, of course, the opportunity to reflect as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of build on the last point related to the area for collaboration, and maybe also come back to something that Mr. Klink has raised a couple of times. I do think, for example, in my domain of the protein transition, that when we achieve that in the Netherlands and when we develop some of those technologies that I've mentioned for sustainable protein production or circular feed systems, that there is a tremendous opportunity for the Netherlands to export that technology and then not be an exporter of fava beans instead of soybeans, but to be an exporter of high quality crops, to be an exporter of the equipment and processing technologies necessary for a purifying of fungal protein biomass, that kind of high-tech export can have a significant impact on the world and can have sort of that win-win situation of the Netherlands as a technology exporter that brings sustainable technologies into places where they are not yet available.
Thank you, Mrs. Piet. I believe that we reached the conclusion and the end of this third session. Would like to thank Ms. Castillo for your digital presence all the way from Rio de Janeiro, and would like to thank both scientists from the Wageningen University and Research Institute. Thank you for being physically here with us and your contributions, your position papers. Very helpful in the quest for knowledge and a better understanding on this complex issue, directing matters in a way forward to the future of this global society. Thank you so much. I would like to schorsen. Break. I would like to have a break. and before we get to the fourth session of this afternoon. Thank you so much for all your support. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Castillo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
A quick test. Can you hear us, meneer Driessen, Mr. Garzotti?
Ik hoor u heel goed.
Perfect. Mr. Garzotti?
Yes, I can. Could you hear me?
Yes, perfect. We'll start in a few minutes. Just a shift between the rounds. Thank you.
Very well. Okay.
Good afternoon. I hereby would... Good afternoon, Mr. Driessen. Good afternoon, Mr. Garzotti. Thank you for being here with us, albeit on a digital basis. We are happy to have you here in this fourth session with regards to international diplomacy. And we have completed 3 previous sessions, of course, as this is a roundtable consultation with regards to the EU-Mercosur treaty. We have multiple members of our Permanent Committee for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation in our midst. Mr. Klink, Mr. Amhaus, Mrs. Teunissen, and also Mr. Hammelburg. We look forward to also receive Mrs. Tineke van der Graaf with us, as you can imagine that they are wrapping up a couple of activities, parliamentary activities here in this afternoon. We're happy to have you here for 30 minutes. I'm not sure whether you were able to follow the previous sessions. It has been pretty diverse, dynamic, with previous subjects on in the area of the NGOs, the knowledge institutions and the scientists, as well as the private sector perspective with regards to this treaty. Of course, you did not submit position papers due to the nature of your position. As Mr. Driessen, you are, of course, the ambassador in Brazil, the Dutch ambassador in Brazil, and Mr. Garzotti, the European Commission of DG Trade. But I would, of course, like to invite you to give an elucidation and introduction with regards to this subject of international diplomacy for EU-Mercosur related developments. I would like to give maybe Mr. Van Driessen the first opportunity to give an introduction. Mr. Driessen.
Thank you very much.
I'm prepared to do it in Dutch and English, but maybe out of courtesy, it's probably better to do it in English so that Mr. Garzotti can also follow my argument, if you agree.
We fully agree this is the subject of diplomacy and that therefore language is one of the items of diplomacy. So we do, of course, understand. Maybe the questions may be directed in Dutch to the comfort of the members. We'll see. But I believe that indeed your introduction might be helpful in English so that Mr. Garzotti is closely aligned to this conversation. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you very much. I thank the committee, of course, for this opportunity to provide input for the roundtable on the EU-Mercosur Treaty, within which Brazil is by far the largest partner. I will focus on the Brazilian context and the value that Brazil attaches to this treaty, because I think that's a point of view that is worthwhile to share in this committee hearing. And also how this treaty for the EU and for the Netherlands is an important part in the cooperation with this country of continental proportions, especially with the current geopolitical relations. On January 1st, 2023, the government of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva took office. This has greatly improved the prospects of a Brazil that is like-minded in many policy areas that are important to the Netherlands and the EU. President Lula has a strong social agenda focused on reducing poverty and hunger. His government has also expressed unequivocal support for the international climate agenda and committed to targets to combat deforestation. In addition, Lula brought back Brazil onto the international stage. In his eyes, Brazil should be a global player. It is currently a member of the UN Security Council. Next year, it will be G20 president. In 2025, it will probably be BRICS president. It has the ambition to host the 30th Climate Conference in 2025, and it wants to become a member of the OECD. The EU and Brazil have entered into a strategic partnership in 2007. Brazil feels that the EU has not done enough to provide follow-up to this partnership and expects new impetus. The EU also wants to invest more in this partnership, which is part of a broader EU commitment to deepen ties with Latin America. With the new government taking office, there are good prospects for a positive and constructive cooperation with Brazil, with the EU-Mercosur Treaty being an important element of that in Brazilian eyes. In addition to market opening and market access, the treaty also provides a framework for broader cooperation in international politics, human rights and social agenda, and policy areas such as innovation, food security, climate, deforestation, and energy transition. In my opinion, and I think in the opinion of many, without Brazil, we will not be able to meet several global climate and sustainability challenges. The country hosts one of the largest natural reserves of forests, and it's one of the largest food producers in the world. Brazil's biggest contribution to CO2 reduction is fighting deforestation. Deforestation is a complex problem with poverty as its root cause, and it's driven by agriculture, illegal mining, and organized crime. This cannot be solved in the very short term, but the new government has taken up this problem immediately. It wants to reverse the negative trend, reverse harmful policies, and rebuild control institutions. President Lula has promulgated an action plan to reduce deforestation to zero, and he has shown during his previous presidencies that deforestation rates can drop drastically. EU criticism of Brazil is seen in this country itself as protectionism and a denial of all the positive elements and developments that are also taking place. Brazil therefore considers it important that we cooperate with them on an equal footing and support them in all activities aimed at sustainability and combating climate change. The EU and the Netherlands specifically support many initiatives to contribute to this. Sustainability of production chains and traceability, innovations in agriculture, and reforestation. The EU-Mercosur Treaty will strengthen and accelerate this. Without such a framework, the EU stands empty-handed, and Brazil's other partners will gladly fill this space. Brazil will certainly not stop producing food, but the chances of doing so sustainably will be more limited. In summary, Brazil values the EU-Brazil strategic partnership and sees the EU-Mercosur Treaty as a cornerstone of this cooperation. The Netherlands and the EU see Brazil as a strategic partner, especially in the current geopolitical context. Politically, with a great convergence on democracy and multilateral rule of law. Economically, where the continent is important for energy, raw materials and food, as well as the resilience and diversification of our supply chains, and as a partner in solving global challenges, such as meeting our climate goals, combating deforestation and energy transition. Brazil, and certainly the new government, expects and asks for recognition from the EU for the new course it has embarked on, and is expecting a extended hand and not a cold shoulder. Thank you very much.
Mr. Driessen, thank you so much for this introduction and the position of the Netherlands all the way in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. Thank you so much. Let's continue and indeed also first have the introduction of Mr. Garzotti. You are with us from Brussels. Mr. Garzotti, may I give you the floor?
Thanks a lot, Chairperson, and thanks a lot as well to Ambassador Driessen for having spoken English, which I well appreciated, and having said something that I could subscribe 100%. President von der Leyen stated in the European Parliament just a few weeks ago that the European Union and the Mercosur country have a unique window of opportunity to take forward the EU-Mercosur agreement. And we have an important year for Latin America, Caribbean and the EU as we move towards the summit of our leaders on the 17th and 18th of July, which will provide a real occasion to focus mind on the importance of our relation with this region and how an agreement with the Mercosur countries would contribute to. There are indeed now even more good reasons than ever to advance on this agreement. Several months ago, even if it seems even more than that, the Executive Vice President Dombrovskis declared that the Commission would have needed changes on the ground as regards deforestation policies in Mercosur countries and more defined commitments on trade and sustainable development before moving ahead with the signature of the agreement. I could just subscribe to all the ambassadors said on Brazil's new environmental policy, and that clearly is changes on the ground, and is radical changes on the ground. So we think we have that. It's not just in Brazil that the ground has changed as well in the European Union. We have practically now, very soon in force, a deforestation regulation in the European Union that will be a game changer. It will go a long way to address the concerns that the EU constituencies have on market produced on market products produced on land subject to deforestation and forest degradation. So that is as well an important change on the ground. The second point was to change to have more defined commitments on trade and sustainable development, specifically on deforestation. And the Commission has finalized a first draft of a protocol that will make the TSD commitments, the trade and sustainable development commitments of the agreement, much more detailed and granular that we have in the original form of the trade and sustainable development chapter. And we've started discussing these ideas with Mercosur this week. You might have seen the press release that we just issued yesterday. I know that the political attention is very much focused on the trade part of the deal, which of course is important, but this is much more than a trade deal. Is a deal that is a fundamentally important geopolitically. Here again, the ambassador had much more eloquent words than I could have. It will strengthen political ties between the EU and like-minded Mercosur countries and will be essential to mitigate the impact of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and to counter the growing presence and assertive presence of China in the region. If we don't seize the opportunity now, we might lose a key chance to be a player in this region. The agreement will ensure as well an opportunity to diversify sources of energy and raw materials for EU company, just thinking about lithium in Argentina and green hydrogen in Brazil. And this is key for our supply chain resilience, but as well to favor the green and digital transition in these countries, and I heard some remarks in the previous session on how the EU technology could help these countries move in that direction. Is of course importantly economically as well. Is the biggest deal that we had in trade terms, and is the first time that Mercosur has agreed with a major economy such an important deal. So we would have a first mover advantage. I would like to underline as well the sustainability perspective. The agreement will provide a platform to engage Mercosur on global challenges from climate change and biodiversity to labor rights. The TSD chapter, which is one of the most ambitious that we have ever negotiated, will be supported by this additional protocol I referred to. And just to give you an example, in this additional protocol, we are proposing that effectively implementing the Paris Agreement, which is what we have in the text of the TSD chapter, means stopping deforestation and forest degradation by 2030, which is what all of the parties to this agreement have agreed in the context of the Glasgow Declaration on Forest in the framework of the Paris Agreement. All of this will work as well if this will be not just an economic and political effort, but as well a cooperation effort. A cooperation effort based on cooperation financing by the EU and the member states, notably in what we call the Team Europe initiatives, but as well on investment from the EU companies in the context of what we call the Global Gateway. This will help Mercosur countries to take advantage of this agreement to generate sustainable development, inclusive, but as well to move faster in the digital and green transition, as I was referred before. A word on what attracts most of the debate in Europe, in my view, not necessarily let's say, doing rights to this agreement. Agriculture is a point that is rarely noted in public debates. We will have as well important gains in agriculture in this agreement. Wine, oil, and of particular importance to the Netherlands, dairy products will enter duty-free in these markets, which are very important ones. There are delicate and sensitive products like beef, sugar, and poultry, which are becoming delicate, particularly beef and poultry, more related to present situation and market situation these days than for the agreement itself. But there we have negotiated limited tariff quotas, which for the first time ever are subjective on top of being limited tariff quotas to safeguard provisions. And what the Commission as well committed to is to mobilize the necessary support for farmers negatively affected by the agreement if there's going to be serious market disturbances. So, as we say in negotiating terms, and as Lang, we think belt and braces to make sure that our farmers do not suffer from this agreement. I give you just one example on one product, which is beef. We've made a concession that is equivalent to 12 days of export of the Mercosur country to China, and which is almost half of the quantity that Mercosur rejected in 2005 when we first tried to conclude this agreement. So, in short, what I would say that in a final word is that this agreement gives us a strong tool to engage Mercosur on an equal partnership, something that in today's world is going to be extremely important as well if we look at how these countries have voted in the UN, in Geneva and in New York on important political issues. It might not be the perfect agreement, it never is, and probably our Mercosur partners think the same for different reasons. But our view is that especially again under today's challenging circumstances, the EU would be much better off with the deal and with a partner with the deal than without it. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Garzotti, and also thank you, Mr. Ambassador Driessen, for both your introductions. Considering the time, I would like to indeed open the floor to the members of our committee However, with the comment and the consideration to be brief and to the point, because we're now, instead of with 3, with 5. So I would like to therefore start with Mr. Klink to reflect and respond to the introductions of both Mr. Garzotti and Mr. Driessen.
Thank you both for your introductions. I have a question perhaps for both. That's if agriculture is not a part of the EU-Mercosur treaty, is there still interest in Brazil and other Mercosur countries to join this treaty, to sign the EU-Mercosur treaty?
Mr. Amhouse, thank you, Mr. Klink.
In the same direction, to Mr. Garzotti, is it feasible to have a trade agreement with the Mercosur without the agriculture chapter in it, or will be there no agreement?
Thank you, Mr. Amhouse. Mrs. Teunissen?
Yes, thank you. My question is also for Mr. Garzotti. Your colleague just now, Sir Driessen, talks about a lot about sustainability and climate, and Mercosur will be profitable for that. But I was wondering, you see now in Mercosur that it's also about lowering the price for the import of soy. And if you lower the price for the import of soy, then there will be more demand for soy, and likely it will be causing more agricultural degradation, like more deforestation. So my question is, you talk about sustainability and climate, but what is actually sustainable for in increasing the import of soy?
Thank you, Ms. Teunissen. Mr. Hammelburg.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Garzotti and Mr. Driessen, for your very clear words. Mr. Driessen was talking about the impact if we, on our relationship geopolitically, but also in our combat for climate change and deforestation in the Amazon, in case we would not ratify Mercosur. And Mr. Driessen was very clear on the repercussions of this. In all respects, Mr. Garzotti, could you say, and would you underline the message of Driessen?
Thank you, Mr. Hammelburg. Mrs. van der Graaf.
My question would be to Mr. Garzotti. Thank you for both speakers being here. At the first round, we also heard about from the agricultural sector that we need improvements because what you just said, Mr. Garzotti, this treaty now isn't perfect. What space is left for negotiations, or and how hard can we make this?
Thank you,
if there are new agreements could be made.
Thank you. Shall we first direct the floor to Mr. Garzotti? Yes, I think the majority of the questions are also for you, Mr. Garzotti. Mr. Garzotti.
Thank you, and again, thanks for speaking in English. Is much appreciated. On the EU-Mercosur agreement without agriculture, this encounters a political and a legal problem. The political problem is that clearly access at preferential terms to our market is something that in this agreement the 4 Mercosur countries are looking into. This is their advantage in the comparative advantage structure, and they would not accept for sure a deal that would exclude exactly the sector where they could produce jobs and growth in their country. There's a legal problem as well. The WTO Article 24, which regulates Article 24 of the GATT, which regulates free trade area, says that the parties shall liberalize substantially all trade. Substantially all trade is normally interpreted as 90% of the trade. So an agreement that would definitely exclude agriculture would not be compatible with these particular standards. So that would be, I followed with interest the deliberations of the Dutch Parliament and the recent motions, but that surely would be problematic on a legal, political, and negotiating term. On the price of soy, I probably didn't understand very well the question. Europe clearly is 94% dependent on soy for import, and we import soy fundamentally in order to feed our cattle, which, and is present particularly now in the debate in the Netherlands as well in other countries, is under pressure to reform in order to be more sustainable, environmentally friendly. The price of soy is set at global level. The agreement doesn't have any impact on soy because soy is now traded between the EU and Mercosur countries duty-free and quota-free. So the soy trade, whether there is an agreement or not, will not change of a comma. I want anyway to make a little reference to what I said before on the deforestation regulation. Soy is one of the progress they covered by the deforestation regulation. Soy coming from deforested areas, be it Cerrado or much less the Amazon, would not be allowed to the European market as soon as the regulation comes into force. On what would be about the sustainability with the agreement or without an agreement, we have seen bad policies, if allow me the term, under the previous administration can do in terms of sustainability. That we didn't have an agreement. My idea is exactly in line with Ambassador Driessen. With an agreement, with the possibility to exert the leverage using the institutional framework that this agreement will create, the obligations and the provisions that we'll have in the agreement as better defined and made more granular in the additional instrument will have an impact in that. On top of that, we'll give the opportunity to this administration, which clearly sees eye to eye with us in terms of deforestation. It is not by chance that Marina Silva, the Minister of Environment, said that she wants to conclude this agreement, to enshrine in the international legal system of Brazil obligations in terms of deforestation that a future administration or even the current Congress, that, as you know, is not necessarily as friendly to the administration as one would wish in this field, to bind this environmentally friendly policy at international level. So I think that the agreement, to conclude, will definitely be a major addition in that sense. Again, not perfect probably, and it's not with a trade and political cooperation agreement that you fix environmental policies that, as the ambassador says, have very deep societal and economic roots, but is going to definitely be a step in the right direction. About renegotiation, reopening them, is going to be extremely difficult. What we have put on the table for this is to discuss the sustainability aspects, but do not reopen the economic and market balance of the agreement, because this will definitely open a Pandora box. To be perfectly frank, the perception in Brazil and in Mercosur countries is that in economic market terms, so in the access that they got to our agricultural market, to be very clear, Brazil and the other Mercosur countries had not the best deal that they could have, put it away. The fact that we managed to get limited quotas, safeguards, and all that, they consider that if we reopen, there's much that they could demand on top. And we don't think that would be of our advantage to move in that direction. Of course, we are now engaging with them, and we'll have to see if that would be the position, because the Lula administration has not yet made a definite, absolute conclusion on how they see progress on this agreement. But what is clear, what they've declared, is that they care about this agreement. They want to see progress soon, And another point Ambassador Driessen made very correctly is the geostrategic importance for them of this agreement. A failure of this agreement would be a failure, to a certain extent, of the Mercosur regional integration as a project, which is already under quite a lot of strain. For example, with Uruguay, as you know, we should negotiate a free trade area with China and Turkey. So that is important as well. Thank you, and sorry for having been a little bit long.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garzotti. Very informative. I believe that there was a remaining question from Mr. Klink to Ambassador Driessen.